The fire was set deliberately. You can almost smell the smoke when you picture it. The courthouse archive in Charleston, 1923, burning through the night while men in dark coats watched silently from the street. They weren't there to save records. They were there to make sure no scrap of truth survived. What burned was not just paper, but a bloodline, an entire dynasty erased to protect a pact forged in 1831. A pact between a French countess and her enslaved attendant, sealed not in ink, but in the cry of two newborns switched under a storm that rattled the bones of Charleston society. One child rose to inherit a fortune, another sank into chains that were never meant for her. For 34 years, the deception fed on forged documents, whispered murders, and shadows of influence that reached into courtrooms, council chambers, and the very heart of Southern aristocracy. And when it finally cracked, when the mask slipped, the truth didn't just destroy a family, it exposed a system, a hidden engine of control. Tonight, I'm going to take you inside that secret. But understand this, once you hear it, you can never unhear it. Charleston, 1831. The city was a jewel polished to blind the world, white mansions rising above cobblestone streets, their balconies dripping with ironwork like lace, their gardens shadowed by live oaks heavy with Spanish moss. But beneath that elegance was a system older than the Republic itself. Wealth built on bondage, bloodlines guarded with the precision of armies, and reputations so fragile that a whisper could topple an empire. In this city of masks, the Peyton estate stood as a fortress of power. Colonel Harrison Peyton, third-generation planter, commanded 3,000 acres of cotton and rice, his wealth flowing from the labor of men and women whose names never appeared in ledgers. But the real axis of the story was not the colonel. It was his young French wife, Countess Margot Devillefort, whose porcelain skin and amber eyes concealed a secret more dangerous than treason. And it was her enslaved attendant, Celeste, whose intelligence and beauty drew the colonel's predatory eye. That year, both women conceived children, one pregnancy rooted in forbidden passion, the other born of violation. By spring, their fates were braided into a knot of doom. Because in Charleston society, blood determined destiny, and in one storm-racked night, blood itself would be rewritten. The night of March 15, 1831, Charleston shook beneath a storm that seemed almost summoned for the occasion. Lightning split the harbor sky, thunder rolled across the bay like cannon fire, and rain hammered the Peyton mansion with a violence that rattled its foundations. Inside, two women labored within yards of each other, yet separated by walls, by class, and by chains. The Countess struggled in her candlelit chamber, her cries muffled by silk pillows. In the cottage just beyond the gardens, Celeste bit down on leather to silence her own pain, attended only by Mama Ruth, the old midwife, who had seen more secrets born in blood than any priest could confess. Before dawn, two cries echoed into the storm. One child, a daughter with olive skin and dark hair, undeniable proof of the Countess's affair with her French physician. The other, a son, pale and sharp-featured, bearing the unmistakable stamp of Colonel Peyton's bloodline. Two children born of sin and silence. Two children whose existence threatened to shatter the fragile empire of appearances. And it was in that hour, as rain lashed the windows and thunder drowned the truth, that Mama Ruth whispered the words that would forge a deadly pact. Miss Margot, there might be a way to protect them both. The Countess sat trembling, her newborn daughter in her arms, skin too dark, features too damning. To present this child as her husband's heir would be suicide. Across the garden, Celeste cradled her son, born of the colonel's coercion, a boy with the Peyton nose, the Peyton complexion, a boy who, by blood, was the rightful heir. But as a slave's child, he was destined for chains, not inheritance. Mama Ruth, her voice low and steady like the storm itself, laid out the path. The children must be switched. Celeste's son would be raised as the Countess's child, while the Countess's daughter would be hidden beneath the veil of slavery, passed off as Celeste's. It was monstrous, yet it was perfect. Each woman would lose what was hers, yet preserve what could not survive otherwise. The Countess would have her heir, Celeste would at least keep her daughter near, and both would be bound together by a secret that could never be spoken aloud. Dr. Russo, the Countess's secret lover, forged the records that very night, writing into history a lie so complete it seemed real. The fire crackled, the storm waned, and in silence the pact was sealed, a pact that would haunt every breath they took for decades to come. The deception held like a mask, stitched too tightly to tear away. Colonel Peyton returned at dawn, weary from surveying his fields in the storm, to find his son and heir swaddled in silk. He beamed with pride, naming the child Charles Harrison Peyton, a name carried through generations like a crown. Visitors cooed over the boy, remarking on his strong features, his uncanny resemblance to his father. None questioned the story, because none dared. Meanwhile, Celeste presented her daughter, Marie, as her own, another slave child destined for invisibility. But here too, the script broke tradition. The Countess insisted Marie be raised within the mansion walls, educated alongside Charles under the guise of providing him with a companion. To Charleston society, it was strange, indulgent, whispered about in drawing rooms, but not yet dangerous. Dr. Russo visited often, maintaining the illusion through careful lies, and Mama Ruth's silence became the backbone of the secret. Yet beneath the surface, the roles gnawed at their souls. Celeste watched her son grow into privilege, with eyes that burned with pride and grief. The Countess obsessed over Marie, pouring into her the love she could never confess openly. It wasn't just a switch of babies, it was a switch of destinies. And destinies, once twisted, demand a price. By the time Charles turned 5, the deception was no longer just a secret. It was a living thing, growing restless, feeding on their every word and gesture. The boy, intelligent beyond his years, devoured books, memorized numbers, and played the piano with a natural gift that startled even his tutors. But he also asked questions no one was prepared to answer. Why did his skin tan differently from his cousins? Why did Marie, officially his servant, seem to think his thoughts before he spoke them? The two children shared a connection that defied explanation, finishing each other's sentences, moving as though some invisible thread bound them together. To onlookers, it was peculiar. To those who knew the truth, it was terrifying. Celeste's heart ached watching her son thrive in the mansion's golden cage, knowing every privilege he enjoyed was stolen from the daughter she now called her own. The Countess, meanwhile, grew obsessive, hovering over both children, as if her vigilance alone could hold the secret intact, and in the shadows, Dr. Russo observed the psychological weight crushing them all. The deception wasn't just holding, it was warping, bending reality itself. Every day it demanded more silence, more lies, more sacrifice. And the children were beginning to sense it. By 1837, Charleston's drawing rooms hummed with whispers, not about the colonel's politics or harvest yields, but about the Frenchwoman who treated a slave child like blood. Marie wore finer dresses than most white children, attended lessons beside Charles, and sat at the Countess's table when guests weren't present. It was a violation of the unspoken code that governed Southern life. "That Frenchwoman spoils her house slaves beyond all reason," one matron hissed over tea. "Slaves who forget their place become dangerous." But behind the whispers lurked something more volatile, the children themselves. Charles and Marie's uncanny bond unsettled tutors, unnerved servants, and even drew sharp looks from the colonel himself. They seemed less like master and servant, more like twins linked by some unearthly current. One afternoon, at a family gathering, Charles innocently asked why he looked nothing like his cousin Edmund. The room fell silent. The Countess smoothed his hair with trembling hands, murmuring excuses about bloodlines and family traits, but her amber eyes betrayed the panic of a woman who saw the mask slipping. Every word, every question, was a blade pressed against the Pact's throat. The dynasty stood in splendor before Charleston, but inside the Peyton mansion, the foundation had already begun to crack. The first taste of blood came quietly, like a whisper behind locked doors. A tutor hired to instruct Charles in mathematics had grown suspicious of the boy's uncanny resemblance to Celeste. He muttered questions too loudly, let his doubts slip in taverns after drink. Within a week, he was gone. Officially, he'd been dismissed for incompetence. Unofficially, his body washed up near the Ashley River, throat cut clean, pockets turned inside out as if robbery were the motive. But those in the house knew better. Colonel Peyton's temper was legendary, and though he rarely dirtied his own hands, he had men who carried out his silences with precision. The Countess trembled when the news reached her. Her husband knew something, perhaps not the full truth, but enough to sense betrayal. Celeste wept in silence, clutching Marie close, realizing the Pact was no longer a private prison, but a battlefield. Every word spoken in that house now held the weight of life and death. Even the children felt it. Charles began to stutter when pressed about his family, while Marie grew watchful, her eyes darting like a hunted creature's. The Pact had demanded secrecy, but now it demanded blood, and once blood is given, it never stops calling for more. The colonel was not a fool. Years of war and politics had sharpened him into a man who saw weakness as clearly as he saw opportunity, and in his own house he smelled both. He watched Charles, his son, with eyes that narrowed when the boy laughed too much like Celeste, when his mannerisms reflected not his father's rigid posture but the fluid grace of the enslaved. He questioned the Countess late at night, his words barbed but never direct. Strange, isn't it, how the boy favors those who serve us more than those who sired him? The Countess would smile, feigning ignorance, her heart pounding so hard she feared he could hear it, but the colonel's suspicions spread like poison. He began keeping ledgers of the children's growth, studying their features with the cold precision of a general plotting a siege. He interrogated servants, punished them for the smallest slip of the tongue, searching for cracks in the story. And when Dr. Russo lingered too long in the parlor, the colonel's gaze turned to him, sharp and calculating. For a man who ruled through control, nothing was more dangerous than the thought that someone in his house had defied him. Secrets thrive in silence, but silence cannot survive the screw. Tiny of a man like Peyton, it was the children, innocent yet dangerous, who threatened the Pact more than any adult. Charles and Marie could not be separated. They spoke in half-finished sentences the other completed, dreamed the same dreams, and sometimes, unnervingly, cried out the same words in their sleep. Servants whispered that the two were bewitched, that Mama Ruth had tied their souls together with some ancient rite. The Countess dismissed it as foolishness, yet even she shivered when Charles recited a lullaby in Creole he had never been taught, a song Celeste had once hummed to Marie alone. At lessons, Marie's knowledge seemed to mirror Charles's, as though she absorbed his education by proximity. It unsettled tutors, who whispered of devilry, but what terrified the Countess was how natural it all seemed, as if some unseen law of blood was breaking through the walls of deception. One summer evening, as guests strolled the Peyton gardens, Charles and Marie stood hand in hand, announcing proudly, "We are not cousins, we are twins." Laughter rippled at the remark, but beneath the laughter lay unease. The colonel's face froze. The Countess nearly fainted. Celeste dropped a tray of glasses, shards scattering like an omen across the marble floor. For the first time, the children themselves had spoken the truth aloud. The colonel's grip on the household turned suffocating. He began staging small cruelties, not out of anger, but calculation, watching for cracks. One night, he ordered Charles to pour him a drink before his hunting companions, then demanded Marie do the same. He studied the way the boy deferred, the way the girl obeyed without hesitation, and in the silence that followed, he smirked as though confirming some suspicion. He assigned Charles to ride with him daily, testing the boy's endurance, demanding discipline more fitting for a soldier than a child. When Charles faltered, the lash of the colonel's words fell hard. A Peyton does not stumble. Yet even as he punished, he observed, comparing every feature, every hesitation against his own bloodline. With Celeste, the tests cut deeper. He would summon her at night under false pretenses, stare too long, ask too many questions about Marie's birth. Sometimes he would mention her son, the child he believed had died. Each word was a blade, probing for the truth. The Countess grew thinner, paler, her hands shaking as she stitched embroidery she could no longer see straight. Celeste prayed harder. Mama Ruth burned herbs for protection, and Dr. Russo whispered warnings. But the colonel was circling. He smelled treachery. He was waiting for one fatal mistake. The breaking point came during a storm, as if the heavens themselves demanded blood. Charles had defied his father, refusing to strike a slave boy during a hunting trip. The colonel returned home in a rage, dragging his son by the collar, his voice booming through the halls. He demanded obedience, demanded the boy prove himself a Peyton. When Charles wept and shook his head, the colonel struck him across the face, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Marie rushed forward, throwing herself between them, screaming words no one expected. "You cannot hurt him. He is mine as much as yours." The room froze. Her slip was small, but to the colonel it was thunder. He grabbed Marie's arm, holding her up like evidence. "This one bleeds too quick for a servant," he spat. "And she guards my son like a mother wolf. Tell me, Countess, tell me, Celeste, whose children are these?" The Countess collapsed into a chair, gasping for air. Celeste's lips trembled, words dying in her throat. Mama Ruth tried to speak, but the colonel's glare silenced her. For the first time, the pact stood on the edge of collapse. The lie that had bound them for years was unraveling, strand by strand, and under the crushing hand of the man they feared most. That night, the Peyton mansion became a battlefield without weapons. The colonel stalked the corridors, lantern in hand, demanding answers. His boots echoed against marble as though the house itself trembled beneath him. In the nursery, the Countess clutched Charles, whispering feverish prayers in French, her body shaking with terror. Celeste hid Marie in the scullery, pressing a finger to her lips, swearing the girl to silence. Mama Ruth moved like a shadow between rooms, burning herbs, scattering salt, chanting protections that even she feared were too late. And Dr. Russo, summoned under the guise of tending Charles's bruises, became their only lifeline. He urged the women to hold firm, to give the colonel nothing. "Doubt is a weapon," he whispered. "Feed it, and it will consume him." So they wove half-truths into their speech, cloaking every answer in ambiguity, feigning ignorance, feigning hysteria. They turned the colonel's own suspicion against him, until he began to question not just them, but himself. Yet the cost was heavy. The Countess agreed to a bargain she had long resisted. If the colonel pressed further, if he uncovered the truth, she and Celeste would do the unthinkable. Better for a man to die than for the pact to shatter. The secret had drawn blood once already. It was ready to take more. The colonel's paranoia deepened into obsession. He began keeping the children under watch, forbidding them from wandering the gardens alone, questioning their every word. He scoured the ledgers of births and deaths in Charleston, visiting priests, midwives, even plantation overseers, pressing for scraps of information. Each dead end only sharpened his fury. At night, he stormed through the mansion with whiskey in his veins, demanding to know why his heir looked less like him with every passing year. The Countess endured his tirades in silence, her eyes hollow, her bows die wasting away from the weight of secrets. Celeste carried her own terror quietly, hiding Marie deeper into the routines of servitude, though the girl's beauty and sharp mind made invisibility impossible. Rumors spread in town of the colonel's decline, his temper, his drunkenness, his cruelty. Whispers tied his shame to the Frenchwoman and her scandalous favoritism of a slave girl. Yet inside the Peyton mansion, the danger was more immediate. One evening, the colonel cornered Celeste in the corridor, his hands gripping her arms like iron. "Tell me the truth," he hissed, his breath hot with drink. Whose child walks under my roof, yours or hers? Celeste's silence was an answer he could not bear, and in that silence he resolved that blood would give him what words would not. The reckoning erupted on a night without moonlight, when the mansion's oil lamps burned low and shadows seemed alive. The colonel gathered everyone, the Countess, Celeste, Charles, Marie, Mama, Ruth, into the great hall. His rifle leaned against the mantel, his pistol heavy at his side. "Tonight," he declared, "the lies end." His voice carried the chill of a battlefield, each word soaked in finality. He dragged Charles forward, holding the boy's chin high, forcing him to stand before all. "This child," he snarled, "is no Peyton. His face betrays you all, and this girl—" He yanked Marie close, her small frame trembling. "She carries the fire of my line more than he ever will." The Countess collapsed to her knees, begging him to stop, her cries echoing off the marble. Celeste stepped forward, her body shaking but her voice steady. "If you harm them, you will lose everything, your name, your house, your soul." The colonel's hand drifted to his pistol. The air grew thick, seconds stretching like eternity. Then Mama Ruth spoke, her voice low but thunderous. "Touch either child, and the curse you fear will be yours." The room stilled. Even the colonel's hand faltered. For the first time he felt fear, not of enemies, but of forces he could not command, and the Pact, battered and bleeding, clung to life by a single breath. What followed that night was never written in any ledger, yet its shadow haunted the Peyton name for generations. The colonel disappeared within the year. Some claimed fever took him. Others whispered of poison in his brandy, a bitter draught poured by trembling hands. The Countess wore black until her own death, her body withering like a candle burning too long. Celeste remained in the house, neither free nor fully enslaved, bound forever by the pact she had forged in desperation. Mama Ruth died with the secret sealed in her chest, though her descendants swore. Her ghost still lingered in the halls, whispering warnings in the language of the old world. Charles inherited the Peyton estate as its heir, yet he carried within him a silence heavier than the land itself. Marie, marked as a servant but treated as something far more, grew into a woman of fierce intelligence, her presence a quiet rebellion against the chains history had written for her. But no one outside those walls ever learned the truth, that blood had been switched, destinies rewritten, and the price paid in whispers, madness, and blood. The Peyton dynasty thrived on paper, but its foundations were bone-deep rot. And in Charleston, the mansion still stands, its windows staring blankly at the world, as if daring anyone to ask what really happened in the year of the Pact.